Right, we're on. Ron, how's it going, mate? This
Yeah.
is. So I ought to, do you know what? I ought to do a little bit of an intro. I always neglect my intro. So I imagine if you're on the podcast, you know you listen to Johnny Bevan, the police burnout coach. But
Oh, I thought you were coming onto my podcast.
no, not coming on
Oh,
yours. No, no. We can just phone your two viewers up and speak to them.
you're already here now, so
I'm already here. I'm already here. So I am. You've already done one. You've been on my podcast before, but this is we're going to come on today and talk about fear because I think it's. I think you've got lots of insights that you can share, and yeah, hopefully dispel some of the myths about fear. But first of all, tell us a bit about yourself.
yeah. So my name's Aaron. Uh, I'm a coach. The end, and I'm not scared. No,
The
yeah. Yeah. It feels like a bit weird because we are doing this. What is it? Last week we recorded an episode, but
Yeah, it was actually yeah.
it's like deja vu. So yeah. So I'll keep it now, and I guess we can dig into the past and my background a bit as we go through this, and how fear's shown up for me at different points, and my relationship to it, and how that's developed. But yeah, so I live in Barcelona with my wife and two kids. Well, I say wife, we're about to get married in the summer.
Lucky
Um,
lady.
thank you very much. She is, and yeah, I'm a coach out here, mate, for ex-military guys who are feeling a bit stuck within their business, within their personal life, and yeah, I'm very happy to be here on your podcast, mate, and I'm going to be taking this audio and using it for mine as we discussed. So yeah,
Yeah.
looking forward to it, John.
And just tell us a little. I know we'll come on to your background, here, but just tell us a little bit about your background before you got into coaching.
Yeah, so I did 10 years in the military. I did 5 years at Royal Marines and then 5 years in the Special Forces, specifically as fortunate enough to be with the SAS for 5 years, which I'm incredibly proud of now. And then after that, I moved into the private security world for 10 years, which saw me go back to the same hot and dusty countries that I'd served in. And then after that, a transition from being away for long periods of time from my young family to get into personal training and strength coaching, and then mindset coaching or life coaching, for want of a better way to put it.
Awesome. And we're going to talk all about fear because we talk about this quite a bit together, don't we?
Yeah,
Because obviously you've experienced fear in your background of what you've done with the military, and then it's been really interesting comparing the fear of when you've gone into sort of business doing your coaching and how we talk about that, how the brain doesn't know any difference, and I can sort of relate to that in the police. Like we have real fear. What I talk about real
yeah,
fear, as in like we're walking in somewhere where potentially our life's in danger or potentially could get hurt, but then we've
yeah,
got almost like this. I don't like to say false fear, but this fear of what other people think of us.
yeah. It was like perceived fear, isn't it? I
Yeah,
think it's like, yeah, yeah.
yeah, something like that.
Thinking about this when I was walking home from dropping the kids off at school this morning. Yeah, I remember you saying it last time, like real fear, just like you say, where there's the potential for harm, or perceived fear, where's that, but the brain obviously doesn't know much difference yet. It gives us the same sort of feeling and sensation, emotion around that will help us keep away from it. Because that's what it's trying to do, isn't it? It's look after us.
Yeah, and I think that's the key bit, isn't it? The brain doesn't actually know the difference between the two, does it? Like you could be in a real
Yeah.
life-threatening situation, and in fact, I found for me when I've been in situations where I think, well, actually, I could actually get hurt here. I found because I use that fear, because it almost has a purpose, as in you feel the fear and you might use it. Like so, either it turns into a fight or you got to run away, one or the other. It's almost like in those situations you're using the fear, whereas there's other situations where you might have a looming deadline or maybe you've said something to someone. You've like for us in the police, it's like a court trial coming up or something like that, and that fear just seems to stay with you because you never, yeah, you just don't, or you, it's because it's so far in the future and you can't really respond to it the way I think you're supposed to respond to it.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying there, two things come up for me. One is just allowing it. So obviously, a lot of the times we don't want to feel that discomfort, do we? So we look to do something to take it away, even if that's something as simple as going for a walk or run or a gym session. And there's all sorts of other behaviors that can be slightly more detrimental to our health and relationships. And then the second one is, yeah, that I think there's no a lot of the times, like you said, there's no physical action to take. And again, a really defining moment for me was a few years ago, just before you reached out to me. I can't remember if it's before COVID or not. Anyway, and for my birthday, I did a bungee jump. My wife arranged for me to do a bungee jump. We drive up to the Pyrenees. I live out in Barcelona. And we're driving up to the Pyrenees Mountains. We go a couple of times a year. It's just on our doorstep. Really, very lucky. To ski in the winter when there is snow, not this year, and explore the mountains and the rivers in the summer, and across this lake and across the as we drive up to the mountains, there's this place where they do bungee jumping off a dam, and it's been there for years. And a throwaway comment one day led me to be standing on the edge of the bridge about to jump off, and it was a really interesting experience actually, because I think it was one of the last times that I'd faced big physical fear, yet I had I knew what I had to do to get myself through, and that was
Mm.
take one step off the bridge, which is really easy, and then just trust the bits of rope and bungee that are
Mm.
holding me. But the point is the physical step. It was easy. It was easy.
Yeah.
Whereas when I got to really understand a little bit more about myself, thanks to the work we did, and what fear was, then the emotion, when there's no physical steps to take, that's when it all starts to get a bit muddied and noisy and
Mm.
struggle. Because at least in my case, I wasn't quite sure what to do with that, or even what I was feeling really sometimes.
I love that. I love that explanation of it. Like when there's like I probably explained it a lot better than I did a minute ago. Like when you say that when you can take that step, like you can, and I can see that like with my kayaking, for example, I get on the river, I can feel this fear, but then when you can sort of manage that fear, and then for me, like you say, you're going to take that step, you're going to do that thing that you're scared of, and then the other side is this hopefully this sort of euphoric feeling I find for me
Yeah, yeah,
with the
definitely. Yeah, the reward, the adrenaline there. Yeah, made it through. Definitely.
so what was your because I always like to think now in as in like relationships like what is if fear was a person if it that's what I always say to people on occasion if fear was a person what's your relationship with them like and so what was your relationship with fear like
Yeah,
before
that's a really.
coaching or anything.
Yeah, I think it was. I'm not even sure. I think it definitely in my military career, I'd experienced real fear and perceived fear lots of times.
Yeah.
But I think it was almost just. It's like just even going to work is probably more adrenaline, fear, and stress than most people probably face in a lifetime. Not everybody, but do you know what I mean? So it almost becomes the norm.
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, there was something physical to do at the end of it. So
Yeah.
again, it wasn't a massive thing, and there was lots of eyes. So everyone was watching. Probably didn't have the tools or experience to express. But yeah, we'll go on to that. The one incident where I was trapped by my fear and sort of almost shut down, fight or
Mm.
flight. We can talk about that in a bit, definitely. But otherwise, I would have been ignorant to it. Really, I think I didn't have the capacity or understanding to recognize when it was, and it was easy to kick it down the road.
Mm.
Really easy. Um,
Do you think you because I think it's funny as soon as you mention SAS, special forces, anything like that, I think there's this perceived sort of this perceived thing that they don't feel fear. I was explaining to someone about some special forces guys that were on a driving course, a story I heard about how they had they were driving like 120 miles an hour on this driving course, and the instructor said they were going about to go through a gap. He thought they're not going to fit through. And normally the driving instructor got the sort of biggest balls on the course, but he's going, we're not going to get through there. And he said, and the driver just leaned over, pressed the button on the mirrors. The mirrors came in, and he shot through the gap between a car and a tractor. He said, with like an inch either side. He said, and he was like, oh, and then he just went, boop, and hit the mirrors back out. No, I think, and someone, when I was telling someone, they went, "Oh, well, that's typical special forces, isn't it?" Almost like that they don't experience, they don't feel fear. But do you think that's the case, or?
No, I don't. But I also think yeah, something come up with me there to discuss, and I think it's that when you're in a certain job, and you'll be able to relate to this, when you're knocking on people's doors and going into places where the unknown or the unexpected, that sort of capacity to switch fear off, or not switch fear off, almost to ignore it or use it, is quite an asset. And
Mm,
it's especially with some of the lads that have been in the unit for a long time, and during those their times, especially like my peer group, or although I've been out for a long time, they've been on the sharp end of things for for a long time. So the ability to press that button and go through the gap has probably helped a lot of people. The difference is, what do they do in the quiet times, or when we leave after 20 years service, or when we go home to our families,
mm,
so I think it's something that is very doable. It takes a certain type of mindset, but I also think there's a long-term price to pay when you
mm,
don't maybe process that or choose to ignore it. Yeah, because if that's a family day out, then there's no need to take that sort of risk. But if you're programmed to constantly ignore that, I'm not saying that's the case, but do you know where
yeah,
I'm going?
yeah, yeah. It is,
Um,
and I think like when you said about the fear, it's not that it's not there, but like yeah, I think you said something key. Then you use it, and for me, it's almost like in those situations, you if you accept it. It's like not that it's not going to go away, but you accept that actually this fear is making you alert. It's like if you were like, yeah, really
yeah,
relaxed. You,
yeah.
I've
And,
seen
and
it.
and also, I guarantee they won't be focused on them. They might acknowledge it, but there's people either waiting the other side that need their help, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
their teammates are relying on them to get there, or they need to guide the rest of the lads through, or whatever it might be. So yeah, it will be a really, although I think a lot of times, at least in my case, it was subconscious, didn't really know or understand that. So I can only speak for myself, but I am a human. And so most of the lads that I served with were also human. They'll probably have felt some level of fear
Mm,
as well. And I think there's an excellent example. I'm not sure if I'll do it because you record this as video, eh?
yeah.
I got this idea. I'm not sure if I stole it completely or got it from one of my kids' book, but for the people that can't see, I'm pulling out colored pens, and it's like if each one of these colored pens represents an emotion: fear, anger, happiness, sadness, regret, shame. If we are not used to expressing those, when we come to write or draw, it's like trying to draw with 10 pens of different colors all together. It comes up
Yeah.
as a real like mess. It's unclear. We're unsure what they mean. We're unsure how to relate to it or communicate it or perceive that. But if we learn to articulate our emotions, like blue is contentment, orange is peace, green is fear, whatever, it makes it a
Mm,
bit easy. It's almost like the what's the word I'm looking for? The ability to articulate and express almost there. But there's certain times when you don't need that, especially in the line of work that I was in, and it
mm.
was almost an advantage not to feel too much because there's something bigger on the other side of it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting where you say like when it's about someone else, when you make it about someone else, you're almost willing. It's not that you don't feel it, but you got a higher purpose. You're willing to feel it, and and the and the thing that I'm interested in as well though is so you're in those situations and like probably repeatedly in those situations. So you almost I just imagine you get used to like we do like if when I was on the squads we go in crashing doors and when you first do it you're like ooh, and then you do it more and more and it just becomes your norm like you say
Yeah.
this feeling.
Even if that tight feeling in your stomach is still uncomfortable, but it's more bearable, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like you've got experience that the other side generally is okay, isn't it? Like you know, and you I think you said something key. I've noted it down there where you said trust. You trust yourself, you trust the people around you. You've got that, which helps. But because like you've applied it there and this fear isn't then controlling you, this is, I think, sometimes the misconception people have then. In other areas of life, does that mean that you handled fear the same way and it never came up?
No, not at all. And you know that. I mean, one of the first things we looked at is the interesting thing is that I'd gone through all that experience without having coaching. So it's a certain level of blindness or a certain perception of how I was and how the world was. And since I've been coached by you and other mentors and other coaches, it's like the whole everything, the way everything looks slightly changes, and the way that I
Mm.
think about it, and I get to question, is that helpful to me or not? But no, well, I think one of the first things we started to coach on was around sales. You'd a throwaway comment of how's work going? Oh, it's a bit shit. I had to do some sales today. And as I said to you last time, you're like rubbing your hands in glee on the inside. You're like, oh, is that what you think? And just to really peel it back. And so, yeah, at the time, I was convinced that I was anxious or nervous about the sales because it was rubbish. I was no good at it. But really, what I was scared of is rejection. And so I was almost like
Yeah.
rejecting and failing myself ahead of time. Um, so that I didn't have to feel that from the potential clients. And here's the thing: there's nowhere for that to go. There's nowhere for it to go. And so I was
Mm.
acutely aware of all my stammers and errors, and speaking in my second and third languages, and so just compounded everything. And yeah, my focus was all on me.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you've got this a real external threat, that is what fear is there for. And
Yes,
our
yeah,
focus is on that. Our focus goes on it, and right, we're going to eliminate that. And we're going to, do something to get away from it or sort it out. But when, like you say, suddenly you're up against this internal game and it's all about this fear of rejection, there's it's all inward then, isn't it? It's like this
yeah.
is something we're avoiding inside. Yeah.
Yeah, and just like you, there's no door to go through, or in the case of the bungee up, there's no step to take off. There's nothing I can physically trust in terms of cords and bungees. It's just sitting with it
Mm.
and getting to understand and make it what I mean, what I will of what I'm feeling and that situation, which is a process, isn't it? So
Because I remember one when we just talked about with you going into cafes and leaving a business card. Can you remember
yes,
that?
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
this is the bit that will really help people because I think they hear this one side of ex special forces doing this stuff where you literally could be life in danger, and then all we're saying is, why don't you go into a cafe with a business card and say, "This is what I do." Now, what
yeah,
was that
yeah.
experience? What's that
Oh,
experience
mate,
of it?
you know it's pretty horrific. And what made it even better was my business card had an email address on it that didn't work and the wrong phone number.
Like a proper dodgy
So like,
salesman.
oh wait, it was, well, if anybody ever looked at them, they probably would have been, yeah. But yeah, so that again, even though it's physical action to take, it was really, really interesting experience because again, I felt so many intense emotions within inside of me, like the real clamped stomach, sweating profusely. I want to make some jokes, but I'm not gonna.
Do it.
Um well, I haven't got any to come to mind.
Oh,
That's why.
that's the real truth.
Ever.
Don't use
Um,
this podcast as a reason that you haven't got any jokes. Don't do that.
they'll come to me afterwards. I'll ring you back after we're going to edit them in because I know you're all about perfectionism. And uh, yeah, so it was incredibly uncomfortable. And I think I walked into 4 or 5 places that day. Everyone accepted my business cards and said, "Oh yeah, just leave them there. Thank you very much." Apart from one place, and it was slightly awkward, and I don't think he spoke Catalan anyway. So we just sort of like looked at each other. But yeah, I came out alive, type of thing, and I was like, "Woof, done." So it was a really interesting experience.
And I think that's the amazing thing, isn't it? We do things that just are dangerous, life threatening. And then, but we go and do something which literally has no real consequence the other side.
Yeah,
And you see this like with public speaking, like to stand
yeah.
up in front of people, even if the worst happens and you forget what you're going to say, literally all this I would suggest that most people are going to actually really feel for you, but even if they don't, like nothing bad happens, but we seem to be more willing to put ourselves in those sort of life endangering situations and be more comfortable with fear then than we do in day-to-day situations.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder, this is like a question to you. Do you think that's because normally there's some physical action to take so we can channel that energy and emotion?
My theory on it is exactly that fear is normal. And that's what we're going to talk to about in a minute. Like fear is normal. It's a response that we're not getting rid of. And in certain situations, we don't question it, we don't fight it because we go, well, of course I feel scared at the moment because this is happening. But when we then do something like public speaking, or just do something out of our comfort zone. Ask. The biggest thing I see is people not wanting to ask because they didn't want to see fear of being stupid. I think we build it in our head so much, and then we move away from it, and the brain just gets used to moving away from it. And like you say,
Yeah.
there often is that step we need to take, but because we can set those parameters more. Do you know what I mean? I think this is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say is like when I go up and knock on a door, if I'm tasked, go and knock on this door, I'm almost like, well, I go and knock on it, and then it's out of my control. This person's going to be there. I've got to deal with that. Whereas if I need to go across the office and ask someone a question, and I'm worried they're going to make me look stupid, I could just not do that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could just not do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just about, for me with fear, is about recognizing that the brain gets it wrong. 100% the brain gets it wrong. It will, and all it's doing is anticipating a danger. Sometimes it's right, as in we're going to be hurt. So we want to listen to it. But most of the time in day-to-day situations and in situations where we want to grow and evolve and, build businesses or get promotion and stuff like that, it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing is for me is learning to listen to it and going, is this, I love what you said then, is this real fear or is this perceived fear?
So do you think then, from your perspective, since you've done a bit more inner work and you're more self-aware and it's what you help people do and you can practice these things daily in your work, do you think you feel more fear now than
Ooh.
before?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that I would say I do, but what I find is when I avoid the fear, I have more feelings of being stuck and
Yeah.
lost. So
The
in other words,
resistance. Yeah.
so I might feel fear, as in like I might go out and do a lot of things, and because I've had to do a lot of work on perfectionism, I was working yesterday on a big report, and I was like, no, that's done, that's the time, and I'll experience that fear. Whereas before, I would have avoided that fear by perfecting, but what that would have been replaced with is longer terms of frustration and overwhelm and
Yeah,
stuff like
but
that.
would that have even registered as fear once
No,
upon a
no, because
time?
I didn't. Because what I've come to realize through coaching and becoming that sort of self-aware is that things like overwhelm protect me from fear, but I was never aware of it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that when I procrastinate, it was fear-based. I just thought I just don't like doing the work.
Yeah. So that comes back to the my point about the pens. If we're trying to draw something with those pens, we're not even sure what it is we're drawing because we
Yeah,
can't identify the color or the shape of it.
you really want to push this pen thing. I
I do,
feel,
mate. I've got a
I feel
sale
like,
going on at the
I feel like,
moment.
are you
It's
selling
my only bit.
pens?
It's my only bit of IP,
Oh,
intellectual
yeah.
property.
But
Hashtag.
no, no, and I 100%, and this is what I realize is a lot of what we're experiencing. Like I coach a lot of people that feel angry. There's people will get really, really angry, and I think anger is that secondary emotion, and it's normally
Yeah, big
masking
time.
fear.
Yeah,
Of course, we don't know that, and we don't know it until we explore it.
yeah,
But what I find is, yes, I feel fear, but I find when you lean into it, and we're not superhuman, we're not always
no,
going to lean into it. We're going to find times when we do back away, and that is fine. But when you lean into it, what you do, I think you lead a more fulfilled life. It's short, you basically get the fear behind you. Because
yeah,
just say like you're worried about, I don't know, completing a task and you put it off, put it off, put it off, or suddenly it's gone on for ages and you're thinking about it anyway. But when you embrace that fear, understand where it comes from and lean into it, that is then done. And you've got more information. So suddenly
yeah.
you see a benefit to the fear and you realize it's almost that trade-off of that short-term fear over this long-term anguish, really.
Definitely, yeah. So the intensity might be slightly higher, but you move through it quicker, isn't
Yeah.
it? And yeah, and like you said there, it's proof to yourself. Yeah, you've got this. You're all right. And I
Mm.
think that's what for me a lot of the time it is. It's the young lad looking to me for reassurance. You're all right. You got this type of thing.
Yeah. And I like that when you said that because I think when people think of positive thinking, they think like, oh, I'm not scared, and all this, and I think
Yeah,
it just doesn't really work. But like, it's that for me is the intentional thinking when you think I've got this.
yeah,
Or a big one for me is I'm doing it scared. So I remember
yeah,
I was stood. So I was sat in the back of a lecture theatre before I was about to give a presentation, and this is where fear is irrational as well, because I'd done quite a few, and in this lecture theatre to more people. But suddenly I had this wave of fear come in. And of course, when we're in that fear state, the blood is diverted from our thinking part of the brain. So, and I was suddenly sat there and went, oh, I can't remember my intro. I could not remember my presentation. And they're literally just introducing me. And I thought, and at that moment, I thought, well, I can panic now and go and let that fear go, or I can just go and do it badly. I can just go and do this messy. I can just do it and forget it. And even saying that calmed me down because it's almost like this alarm's going off, going, oh, you're going to forget it. You're going to look stupid. You're going to look stupid. And I'm almost going, I'm okay with looking stupid.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
going to be, it's going to be uncomfortable, but we're okay with it. And I got up and ironically, I did a different intro and someone that was in the audience who'd already been there before said, oh, it's really good because it's like a different presentation. I was like, that's because it was because I forgot it. But it had a benefit. It suddenly had a benefit.
yeah. I bet it was a lot more natural. It flowed, wasn't it, rather than trying to stick to a structure. And I
Yeah.
think for me, one of my beliefs is like I'll be okay. So even if if in that case it'll be the presentation goes to a bag of shit, it might be horrific emotionally for me in that moment, but it's not
Mm,
going to change me as a person. I get to decide, even if there is comments like, "Oh, that was a bit of shit," or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously
mm,
that noise will be a lot louder in my brain. Um, but yeah, I think I'll be okay. And as you know, that's allowed me to lean into a lot of uncomfortable things, which has been very, very beneficial for me and
mm.
and my family. And yeah, so
I think, like you say, that I'll be okay. This is my theory on why this works. Because if you're just about to stand up, and we're talking about presentation, but you put in whatever your thing is, if you're listening to this, what you're backing away from, what you're feeling fear about, what you're scared of. But if you tell yourself, I'm not scared, it's going to be great, I'm not scared, but you don't believe, you got to check in, do you believe that? Whereas
yeah,
when you
yeah,
think, I'm going to be okay, like what works for you, that might not work for someone else, but
exactly,
actually
yeah,
for you, that seems really believable. Like, and actually for me, that is believable because like you say, okay, well, I might stand up there, people may not like it, but when I go home, I still go home to my family.
yeah.
Life is still, the world's still spinning round, lovely jubbly.
Oh, and what we forget as well is that, at least in my case, if we take the presentation as going not that well as the example, it might stay on our mind and we might replay it hundreds of times. But the reality, everybody's going back to EastEnders, an argument with their wife, or tie a messy house that they need to tidy up, and that plays on their mind rather than 10 minutes out of their day where we may or may have not messed up in a presentation. I think
Mm.
that's been a great reminder for me. Nobody really cares as much as I do.
And they don't care as much as you think in this perspective, isn't it? Because I
Yeah,
know someone said this to me when you walk in a room, because often what I see is this imposter syndrome, people, which is just fear, isn't it? Let's be honest, it's all
yeah,
fear. And you walk into a room and you think everyone's looking at you. But if you think that most people in that room are in that room thinking everyone's looking at them, well, no one's actually focusing on you because they're all focusing on themselves
yeah,
anyway.
exactly. Yeah,
So no one even,
yeah,
and like you said with the presentation, I've seen it in mine. Generally, I get quite good engagement, but sometimes there's people in there and they're checking their iWatch, they're checking their phone, like, and they go back to their busy day, don't they?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's great.
It's interesting what you're saying about perception, and this is my opportunity to get this out. And I can feel the fear what coming up in my stomach, and I think we all know, for you probably know what I'm going to talk about, and that is the perception of myself in an incident that happened to me in the military
Right?
when
Yeah.
when I was away serving. We got into a firefight, and I didn't react how I thought I should have in that moment.
Mm,
So my perception, yeah. So I thought that I was really fearful and labeled myself a coward for years and years and
yes.
years. When I got to look at that situation from a different perspective, through a new lens, a less judgmental one, and
Mm,
got to understand it, then really what I'd experienced is really quite normal. And quite a few people reached out to me, both that had served with me and experienced similar things. In terms of when my brain anticipated on that day that I was closer to death than life, it shut down because it
mm,
couldn't handle the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that was just pumping through it. And again, there's no physical action to take. In fact, I can remember my body trying to discharge that energy with my arms shaking, and the guy sat next to me whose foot was bouncing up and down like it was on a jackhammer, just to try and get rid of that energy, because at the moment we just sat in this vehicle that was coming under fire. So there's two other things I want to mention about that. First of all, I don't like to use that example because it brings up a lot of vulnerabilities for me, but also there's the potential to pedestal and think, oh yeah, but I've never been in that situation, or oh, that is real fear, I never experienced that. But that is not true, because like you said right at the beginning, the brain doesn't know the difference. So the fear of a presentation, the fear of rejection when we speak to somebody at work, or the person we're attracted to initiate the conversation, it doesn't really matter. The brain still gives us that mass of chemical and emotions to try and help drive an action, which 9 times out of 10 is to protect us. And my perception of that day was that I just, as a young lad who feared for his life, and temporarily shut down for probably 30 seconds, and I get to change what I make that mean. So I assumed people were judging me. It was really, I was just constantly judging myself, and it got quite tiresome, and as you know, heavy. And I can remember literally sat in this chair, like almost like mimicking taking off the backpack or the burden of weight or that burden of judgment. And every time I do that, it is still like a release. So
it's like carrying a backpack full of rocks, isn't it? And
yeah,
and I think
definitely.
that is going to resonate with people that listen to this, because I've heard recently where there was a job, and I can't go into too much detail about it, but basically someone went into a house where there was someone that was badly hurt, and the offender was still there, and I think they had a knife. And actually, there was this person felt fear, but actually they dealt with it. I think they dealt with it really, really well. But there's this, and what I see is, like we say, that perception is that shame of the fear.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and this is what I say to people: is it's not about the fact that you feel fear. Fear comes from our thoughts, our brain's perception of that situation, and it has survival in mind as the as the paramount, and sometimes it shuts us down.
Yeah.
But actually, when you put fear as your situation, you go, I'm feeling fear. It's your judgments about that fear that really hold you back, isn't it? Like,
Yeah. Or judgment of ourselves. Yeah. About ourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And if you don't, because I remember when I was always seen as someone that was at the forefront, as in, like, if there was a door going in, I was at the front. And and it's funny because people see me as brave and didn't care, but I was actually at the front because I was scared and I hated the anticipation of being at the back.
Yeah.
And I put myself in the front. And but what I remember quite a few times where, like, we stopped someone, I had him held up against the wall, and my leg was shaking. And he
Yeah.
actually pointed it out, and he went, "Why is your leg shaking? Are you scared?" And I was like, "I'm not scared. I'm not scared." And then my colleague after went, was almost, "Oh, don't worry about that. These things happen. And it probably wasn't fear." And I tried to mask it. Whereas
Yeah.
now what I do is I go, "Well, yeah, it was fear. My brain doesn't know this person. He thinks I'm about to be hurt, and it's filling me with adrenaline and cortisol, and that's making my leg bounce because I'm not using that energy right now. But if this is how I address it now, but if you kick off,
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready
Yeah.
to go."
It's good to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a chat on my podcast, Forging Resilience. Hashtag, with an actor who I met here in Barcelona in the gym. Lovely guy, really interesting. And we talked about fear as well, because he's one of those guys that he struck me as just different right away, and I recognized that he was playing into his character at the time. He was practicing his character for something. I didn't really know he was an actor. And when I did, it took a fair amount of courage to say, "Hey, can we stay in touch?" But anyway, that's another story. And we're talking about fear before performances, and he recognizes and accepts that he feels a certain level of nerves, and he's quite an established actor here in Spain and in Catalonia, So yeah, it's really interesting. So he doesn't really try and fight it. In fact, he tries to flow through it and lets it be there Yeah, and even mistakes. We had a really interesting conversation about mistakes on stage. So
Mm.
again, yeah, acknowledgement and recognizing then allows, at least for him and also for me, to know what it is and maybe not know how to manage it or understand it rather than shut it off or run away from it.
And I think we hear a lot of people say we hear people say words like allow it, manage it. And I think people don't know how to. And it'd be interesting for you how you do. But what I do is I literally let it move around. Like take like because I think of it as like a I heard this great analogy, it's like a hose pipe. If you've got like a stone in the end, that water's coming through and that pressure's building up. You let it out, you take the stone out, take that resistance to the fear away, and it just flows and it loses its pressure. It's still
Yeah.
there, but it loses pressure. And I sometimes just sit there and I find I've always got to close my eyes if I'm feeling any sort of fear, really. Obviously, not if I'm just about to go through a door and arrest someone, not so good. I wonder why everyone's been getting
Well,
away lately.
maybe slightly beforehand though. I've heard people
Yeah,
talk of that, you know. So in when you're driving there, before you get in the car, or find a quiet minute just before.
yeah. And what I do is I close my eyes and I just and it is as simple as this. I let it. I experience how I do is I tell myself I'm experiencing fear, and I would just notice it. And what you'll do is you'll notice like the vibration in your body. Like for me, I can feel everything pulsating, but just let it do that. And then my heart beating faster, my breathing shallower. But I don't try and change that. I just let that all move. And I've done this when I go kayaking. If I'm about to get on a river, it's basically about above my grade that I feel comfortable on. I go in and I have the same routine when we're going to Dartmoor. I sit in the toilet. It's lovely. I've got some pictures of it. I'll share it.
Yeah, but you didn't know they were taken, did
Yeah,
you?
yeah, exactly. It was that sort of toilet. The lovely
Which one is
guys.
it, by the way?
Those spy holes that are down that lower. I tell you what, he took my eye out when I looked through that. I, I sit,
Oh,
I sit there, and I just, whereas I used to pace around and try and get rid of the fear and be like, and what I used to do is really over talk and be really
yeah,
animated. And I get on the river and I was just so stiff and I was knackered before I started.
yeah,
Now I sit there and I do some breathing, but I just let the fear be there. And my legs will bounce, my arms will shake, my hands will shake. And I'll just be like, oh, it's just flowing through me. And it's like then when I get on the river, it's like the fear is still there, but I've expressed it. Just like if I had, like we said, when you take that step and the fear goes through, I'm allowing it to do that. And it's then I take it with me and it just doesn't become a problem. And I think that's something, if you feel fear, just let yourself feel it and don't if you have experienced fear and you're feeling some sort of shame about it, address that.
mm,
Because I see so many people, they go into these experiences, experience fear, have a lot of judgment of themselves about the fact they felt fear, and then suddenly they don't want to experience that situation again.
yeah.
And they visit.
Without getting an objective opinion or conversation around it, so they arrive to their own conclusions, which are often
Mm,
with a blurred perspective of what's happened anyway. Yeah,
yeah.
and it's a great point you make about trying to make it like tangible or real, because it can be quite abstract. Yeah, those things. So the way I think of it is that if you think of a triangle, instinct at the bottom in the gut, emotion is the middle step in the chest, and intellect or thinking at the top. If we, for me, the base we is so wide of instinct, but we're not really trained or we don't really use that. And so we try and outthink through a really limited funnel our way of
Mm,
a situation. So for me, it's about stepping outside of my thinking and, just like you said, coming into my body now.
yeah.
So like you, I would close my eyes, focus on the physical feelings within my body rather than
Mm,
outthink them. And every time I think about them, it's just come back to that physical sensation in my body, which for me is usually a clamp in my throat and a really like a knot in my stomach.
mm,
And often, especially if I'm doing podcasts or interviews with people that I perceive are quite well known, or like yourself with 5 listeners, not the 3 that I've got, then I will take some physical action. I will take some physical action just to regulate, just to,
yeah.
there's no harm in a few squats or stretches off camera, but before going into it, so that's something that I do, and I really can't uh, explain the benefit of having somebody else hold that space for you without judging you to express it, because yeah, it's like a 3-year-old. You're trying to your 3-year-old mind or 7-year-old mind is having another conversation with another 7-year-old, and that's fine. But you're not 7. You're probably mid-30s, mid-40s, and you're an
Mm.
adult. And there's different ways to see the
Yeah.
situation.
And like you said, the fear, when you start allowing, what I find is when it's an emotion you don't want to, when you don't want to experience, you'll go, as a coach, we obviously always get permission to do that with someone. But when they said, yeah, I want to do it, but you'll see them try and flit away and they go back to their head and you're like bringing them back.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think
yeah,
that's really key what you said about, I love that analogy of the triangle, because yes, you can think about it after and before you go in, as in like way before, you may be able to get conscious and be aware and start thinking, actually what you want to think in that situation. But when that switch is flicked,
yeah,
I think people got to understand that you can't think your way out of it, because you're the thinking part of your brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, is actually switched off. The
yeah,
survival part
yeah,
of the brain has gone, we don't need that. We got
yeah,
no time for rational thinking. And like you say, going in and allowing it and processing it through is the way to then allow that to come back online. That's how I look at
yeah,
it. It's
yeah,
almost give myself
definitely.
a bit of time.
And what's helped me with that is stepping into that slowly. So, like you said, it's to find the things that trigger something within me. In fact, I don't like that word very much. That brings something up within me, and slowly take steps to lean into that. So you're practicing, so that the day that you are public speaking or going through the door in your job, or asking somebody for something you don't really want to, you've already got a bit of evidence or practice that, at least in my case, you'll be okay.
Yeah. And and I totally agree with that. And what I read a great book called Tame the Amygdala. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but they and I realized actually this is what I've been doing in my coaching practice, is creating awareness for people where the fear comes from, then exposing them to that fear and helping with the response. And I realized this the other day. I seen someone down in my local town, went down for a haircut, which if you're on the
Yeah,
podcast, you won't
it's
be able to
looking on
see, but
point
it
there,
is
mate.
it's the same haircut I've had for 45 years, tried and tested, never let me down. But but when I used so this person when I was 15 bullied me, which led to my dad going down with large lumps of wood and
Having a
sorting.
quiet word.
Yeah, he was that sort of approach. But I remember every time I seen this person, and I did lots of stuff, like I did judo to make myself fitter, stronger. But what I realized is I never addressed the fear in my brain.
Yeah,
So I could, and at one time, like when I was at my peak of doing judo, I was very capable, black belt in judo, and I could really handle myself. If I seen him, oh my God, the fear. And
yeah,
what would I do? My natural way, and I think it's really important to see your natural way. Some people's is to fight. Mine is actually to avoid and to what we call fawn. So if I was in that situation where you're suddenly, you can't run away, rather than fight, that would be my last resort. What I would do is befriend. And oh, yeah.
yeah,
And I notice that in myself. Sometimes it's an advantage, sometimes not. But I realized every time I've seen this person for years, I would have that response. And I actually ended up dealing with them in the police. They were a suspect. I was a police. But even that, I could feel it.
I
But
bet.
I
Yeah,
worked on that fear now. And I walked in there and we're both in the hairdressers together. And actually, the fear, I thought, blimey, that's the first time my amygdala, the fear center, hasn't kicked off.
yeah,
And it was like a little, it was like a little, oh, it's him. And it was like, yeah, but we're fine. But we're fine. And we can handle whatever happens. And as we know, nothing ever happens, or very rarely does. And what I find is that person probably finds it more awkward than me,
yeah,
and and I show up as a very different person then. But what my point of that is, I did loads of things to try and conquer my fear, as in
yeah. Get rid
becoming
of it almost.
stronger, become developing a skill, doing all this stuff, and it never actually addressed it.
Yeah,
And now I haven't done judo for years, and I'm a lot older now. But because in my mind I'm okay with that fear and I've addressed it and I realize it's not really a reality, it's just perceived, that fear, that brain is quieting down. And it's just amazing to see that you can change your response to. You are not going to eliminate fear, but if there's a certain situation which you back away from, whether it be interviews, whether it be whatever it is in your life, presentations, whatever you're doing, if you create awareness around it and you put yourself in front of it and learn to allow the fear instead of resisting it, you rewire that amygdala, that
Yeah.
part this takes over the brain, and you can then get back control. Is
Yeah.
what I want to say, really.
Yeah, I love it. And for me, it's that I, despite my background and despite the fact that I work on myself, yeah, just like you, still feel it, and I wouldn't want to get rid of it either. And I recognize that I fall into ruts or traps that I also like, and I believe that I need help to see sometimes
Mm.
the way out, because yeah, very, very human to not ask for help or to stay stuck or to keep a head down or ignore
Mm.
the difficulty, even though that is my day job type of thing. So yeah, it's not about eliminating, it's about managing. I think one of the biggest things for me was the fear of asking for help,
Mm.
um, to say, yeah, let's do something about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I and one of the last things I want to share is a tip for people, because I think it's good if people have things go away. And I think I'm pretty sure we did this when we were working together, was the dare of the day.
Yeah.
And someone said the other day, I was coaching them, and we worked a lot on their relationship with themselves. And as it does, sometimes takes a little while, but we used ways of dialing down that inner critic. But then the next stage really was facing what they feared. And a great hack for the brain, if you want to do this, is to make the doing those things the reward.
Mm.
So a dare of the day is you can have a jar, you can just have a sheet of paper, and if you want it, I'll send it, put a link, I'll put my email, just send me an email and I'll send you the sheet. And all you do is you find the thing you're scared of, and you do it every day for a month. I often try and aim to get 100 of them. And then what you do is you're not trying to avoid the fear. So a classic is putting the hand up and asking. Say you're on a Teams call or you're in a meeting and someone comes out with an acronym which no one knows bar the person that's bloody saying it anyway.
Because they invented it.
Yeah. And they probably don't even. I've actually asked people, what does that mean? They're like, I don't know. Well, you just said it. But in that point where you feel that fear of putting your hand up, because the fear is protecting you from the embarrassment. But what the dare of the day does, he goes, well, I'm trying to get 100 of these dares. So you actually go, oh, and this is what this person said. They went, suddenly they wanted to put their hand up. The thing they feared for years, nearly 30 years, suddenly they're going, oh, that's an opportunity to do my dare. Yeah. And they'd ask the question, fill the fear. And what the byproduct of this is, the first few times, is the fear's stronger and it feels harder. But after you've done it 20 times, you're like, is that it? And then the fear is not coming up.
Yeah.
And the other side of it is confidence. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. You then hack the brain to be able to move towards fear. And suddenly that thing you fear will just become your new norm. And you can
Yeah.
apply it with so many different things.
Yeah. It's just a thing rather than a thing about you, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Is there
Love it.
anything else you want to say, mate? Because I think this has been really good, actually, and really sort of insightful and useful. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, it's about time. We've been waiting to do this for a while, but it's been a pleasure, mate. I'm very grateful to be able to chat to you and all 5 of your listeners and 3 of mine.
I
8, if
almost
my
wish I
maths doesn't
pressed
fail me.
record. I was looking up in the top corner there thinking, I hope I recorded this.
Well, I've got it. I can sell it to you for a price, mate.
Now, if anyone, you'll send me your details and I'll put them in the sort of show notes anyway. But if anyone listens to you and thinks actually you really resonate with them, just quickly, who do you help and how would they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so generally focus on ex-military guys, but entrepreneurs looking to get a bit of balance back in their life. Really, the guys that are feeling stuck, live into the potential that they probably know they're capable of, but have lost sight of. And the best way to get in touch with me is through my very popular podcast, Forging Resilience, through LinkedIn, Aaron Hill 79, and Instagram, Aaron Hill _79 as well, mate.
Yeah,
So yeah,
send me all that and we'll stick that
will do.
in the show notes. But it's been absolutely brilliant as always, mate. And then I'm sure we do a few more.
Definitely, mate. Love it. Thanks very much for having me on here, John. It's been a pleasure, mate. And speak
Take it
soon.
steady. Have
All
a
the
good
best, buddy.
one.